So I'm delighted, and I genuinely mean that, to have the opportunity to welcome Cameron Kieran to present our first keynote speaker. Cameron is a PPI contributor, a member of the PAB, a PhD student in physiology, project coordinator of the International Diabetes Federation in Europe. And those few words don't do any justice to Cameron. So I'll hand over to Cameron and let's hear from him. Thanks very much, Cameron.
Thanks very much, Adele. I think I'm definitely shorter than the average person, so I might move this down. Perfect. So thank you so much for inviting me to give a keynote address this morning. I'm hopefully going to take you through a little bit of my journey within PPI and some reflections I have about being a part of the PAB, and also some kind of looking towards the future. Why is PPI still important, and why do we still need to have conversations about it, and how do we do that as a collective, I suppose a collective group of both PPI contributors, researchers, and public entities and institutions. But I wanted to start with something first before I go on to the slides. And it's something that I think we're often afraid to have a conversation about when we talk about PPI or PPIE or engaging with people outside of a research structure. And that's the concept that it's okay to not know everything. We don't have to do things in this world, in this PPI kind of chasm of knowing everything and knowing how to do it. So much of what we do in PPI is learning together, figuring things out as we go, and being open to new perspectives and new ways of doing things. And that's hopefully the sentiment I want to capture today, not only how PPI has changed since I started a number of years ago, but how we also change with it. So I wanted to, I'm kind of exposing myself here, but I wanted to go all the way back to why did I start in PPI, and why did I start, I suppose, along this journey. That is myself and my twin sister and my family up on the top. That's right about before I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, maybe a year or so before I was diagnosed. I was diagnosed in 2011 at 16 years old with a life-changing condition that I knew nothing about. In the health service in Ireland, depending on where you're based, you may be put into a paediatric system or an adult system at 16 years old. In my case, I was diagnosed in Sligo, and the system there was that I was considered an adult. So I was diagnosed at 16, straight into an adult system that was not designed or set up for young adults or young people like me. I spent a vast majority of that first number of years of diagnosis going to clinics where I didn't meet anyone else my age. I didn't meet clinicians that really understood how to talk to young people about diabetes. A lot of the conversations that I was having with people at clinics where they were dealing with complications around managing their diabetes, or they were living with type 2 diabetes, and we had completely different experiences. There was a level of stigma of, why are you here? You don't look like someone with diabetes. You don't look like you live with this condition. And all within that space of that year, I was then moving to university. And so my parents were just had a child diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Then a year later, I was saying, okay, I'll see you now. I'm going to go to Galway and go to university. I didn't know how to manage my diabetes. I didn't really understand what it meant. There was very limited resources, very limited access to I suppose, space and encouragement from peers, from people who understood what I was going through, and also for people who understood what living with diabetes for the rest of your life was going to mean. And I had to try and learn how to live with that, but also navigating a healthcare system that really wasn't designed for young people. I'm not saying it's perfect now, but some of the work that we've done, hopefully the last 10 years, has helped with that. But it very much sparked something within me of, I was really frustrated about what I was dealing with and navigating living with diabetes. But I was also really frustrated that I didn't know anyone my own age. I was coming to university and trying to navigate, how do I have conversations with peers about diabetes? I didn't want to tell people that I had diabetes because I didn't want to seem different or something else or othered. But it was something, an important conversation I needed to have. And then in about 2012, 2013-ish, I can't remember the exact age, Sean, you might remember more than me. My mum called me one day and she said, I've seen a poster for an open evening for young people with type 1. I think you should go along because you might meet someone that lives with type 1 that's your age. And that's what started my journey with the D1 Now project, which was one of the first kind of flagship projects in this part of the world around including young people in research through a PPI lens. That picture kind of beside the picture of the human brain in person, that's a picture from that initial evening where we came together. There was probably around maybe 20 young people, give or take, that lived with type 1 that came along. And we had really no idea what the project was about. All we knew is that it was about diabetes. They wanted to hear from people like us. And my mum was calling me every day to see if I was going. So I was going. And I went there with no expectations. I went there purely because, well, I'm going to have to explain to my mother why I didn't go. But also I might find someone here that lives with type 1 that I can actually connect with, who's my age, who understands what I'm going through. And what that sparked then is the last 12 or so years of being involved in various different PPI projects. Within the D1 Now project, we set up a youth advisory panel, a young adult panel, from that initial meeting where there was around 8 to 10 over the course of those number of years, young people living with type 1 who shaped and influenced what the D1 Now project looked at. And that was specifically looking at how do we improve healthcare outcomes for young people living with type 1. We wanted to hear from young people, we wanted to understand their experiences and figure out how we did this together. We certainly didn't, and I think Sean, you'll agree with me, we certainly didn't know what we were doing most of the time. We were certainly kind of navigating that together. One of the biggest examples I always talk about is for the first year of meetings, the team that were organising them were convinced that because the diabetes centres would tell us that too many carbohydrates are bad, they found this pizza place that made these thinnest pizzas. And that was we got to the year review, what's going well? We were like, we like the meetings, we like people. What's going wrong? The food is terrible, change it. And so we navigated all those different things. We had a conference where we organised it with young people around called Strength in Numbers, around the work that we were doing. We were part of a documentary showcasing what PPI was. We were part of publications, we were part of conference presentations. We were embedded in every possible way that the research team could think to put us or have us involved. We were there. And the core of why we were there wasn't that we were going to get everything right, but it was that they understood fundamentally that if they wanted to do a project that looked at improving healthcare or life outcomes for young people with type 1, then the only people that should be directing and leading that is young people with type 1. And I think that when we take that approach, sometimes within the research world, and I say this as someone come to the end of my research career, 2 weeks hopefully I'll submit my PhD thesis, it's sometimes a little bit of a hard thing to give up that control and to hand that over. And I think, we had a wonderful example of being able to do that here, where we were led and co-led by each other. We created relationships, we created trust, we built a space where we could have open conversations, where we could tell each other, that food is terrible, I want to change it. Or we could go, I really disagree with what we're doing here with this project, I think we should look at that. And that has built, I suppose, a life for me over the last 10 to 12 years of being involved in various different PPI and public initiatives. I'm very fortunate that I've had so many incredible opportunities that came truly from a conversation with my mother about go meet people that are like you, and please go make friends. But it has allowed me to take leadership roles and spaces in places that maybe people who have my experience and my background would maybe never have been. Some of the pictures here I have is I've had the opportunity to speak at the European Parliament about young people and diabetes and what we want to see from a European perspective. Up in the top right, just this July, we met with the Commissioner for Health and the Commissioner for Intergenerational Fairness as a group of 10 young people from Europe. What did we want from type 1 diabetes in Europe, and what did we want the commissioners to do about it? Alongside that, I've been fortunate here in the university to run and be elected as education officer. I don't think I would have had the confidence to do that if I didn't have the experiences within PPI and having the opportunity to have access to so many people and skills and trainings in order to be able to speak like this in front of people. I think, if I look back to that first initial conversation, all those years ago in Jigsaw where we met as the D1 Now Youth Panel, I barely said, 2 or 3 words to people. I was so nervous, I couldn't speak in front of people. And the beauty of PPI is that it allows you to develop and grow into that. So you're not just creating impact on research, but you're creating impact on people. And some of the other projects that I've been involved with, particularly around young people, you'll see a lot of my experiences around youth and youth engagement. One of the other projects I've been very fortunate to be part of is around a global solidarity, global youth project across 22 countries across the world, where we've looked at how do we want young people to be engaged in global movements, in climate action, in climate justice, but also in conscious leadership, leading through empathy. And we've been very fortunate, I've spoken to some people here about this, that the MasterCard Foundation funded that project for the next 10 years for $10 million, so that we can encourage and include over 2,000 to 3,000 young people over that next 10-year period to continue this work. And I'll touch back a little bit about that towards the end of this, around kind of sustainability and why that's important. But I wanted to talk a little bit about why we still talk about PPI. And it's because it's more than just research. I think we've heard from the video and hopefully from some of my experiences that it is also about community, and it's about inclusion, and it's about finding a place where you feel wanted, you feel valued, and you feel seen. And if we have research in healthcare that doesn't include the public and patient voices, then we don't have what really counts, and that's the human side of things. It's about power too, and it's about sharing it, moving away from the idea that research is done to people and not done with people. And being a part of the Public Advisory Board has been one of the most rewarding things I've got to do over the last number of years, where I've seen ideas from people with lived experience shape research projects in ways that make them genuinely better and more relevant and more sustainable. But I'll also be honest, it's not always easy. And I'm not here to say that PPI is really easy and it's something that you can wake up tomorrow and just get everything right. We've had to navigate lots of usual challenges, managing expectations, making sure involvement is meaningful and not just box-ticking exercises, but also figuring out what does true partnership really look like. And the answer to that is that it's different in every single project. And unfortunately, we'd love to have a one-size-fits-all model, that this is what true partnership, and you do these 5 things, and we're good. But it's actually more of a conversation and a community building exercise in each of the different projects. And I wanted to give one example of a good example of one of the pieces of work I did within the Public Advisory Board with the RCSI, Royal College of Surgeons of Ireland PPI office, where they looked at the PAB, the Public Advisory Board. They were doing a project on how do we include lived experience in the review and I suppose, assessment of ethical applications. It's a very niche area. It's not something you would necessarily think PPI or lived experience would want to be involved with. But they looked at the Public Advisory Board and they looked at the experiences and background that people had. Myself and Mandy, who you saw in the video, have experience in these areas in research. And so they worked with us in a way that suited our schedule, in a way that really meaningfully included our voices, but in a way that they were led by us and we were led by them in terms of navigating what this could look like. And it was an example of clearly looking at where do we have expertise and where does the lived experience have expertise? How does that work together? How do we make this work along to everyone's schedules? And how do we end up with a product at the end that actually everyone is really happy to stand over and say, I feel reflected in that? But I wanted to touch back on the challenges a little bit. And I think sometimes we talk about the negatives and it's important to flesh those out. But some of the things that have kept me going in PPI are really reflective conversations and questions where we sit together and go, okay, well, what worked? What didn't work? What can we do differently next time? And how do we honestly reshape a program or a process after we've done something without being too critical or too negative, but also being open and honest and saying, okay, well, not everything worked and we can do this together. And that brings me on to why we still need PPI. I think we've done a lot of strides. When I started over 10 years ago in PPI, it was very much a kind of a consultation process. It was very much if we give someone an application and say, review this, and they come back to us, then we've done PPI. Yeah. That's not accepted now. There's lots more ways of what we do to build in PPI, but it's still important to have those conversations. We need to keep building bridges because there's still gaps, diversity being one of those, bringing in voices that aren't always heard, not just the usual suspects, and I'm guilty of that, so not just my voice in lots of these conversations. And some of the work that I've been doing over the last number of years is to try and build more sustainability into the youth voices coming through into PPI. I've spent a lot of the last 10 years being the youngest person in the room. I'm glad to say I'm not the youngest person in the room today, which is great. But I want to see more of that. So how do we keep building diversity and building in those voices that we don't usually see? When we also talk about value, recognizing lived experience as a form of expertise, but also balancing public and patient voices. We very often look at lived experience as lived experience of a particular condition, when we don't look at lived experience that we all have within daily life, that we can all contribute outside of our researcher hats if we wear those to these types of projects. We all live life, we all live different experiences, we all have different backgrounds, different values, different morals, different ways of viewing the world. And that's important when we talk about enriching research. So it's important that we balance that and we don't overburden, going back to that usual suspects, we don't overburden people and we create opportunities for many. One of the things that I think is really important to talk about is sustainability. How do we make PPI something that lasts and isn't just a short-term situation? I've spoken to Adele and others about this. How do we move away from the chicken and egg scenario of we have a project, we need someone to review it. We don't have a PPI board because we don't have a project. And going through this endless cycle of not having pools of people or spaces where people are empowered through conversations, through action, and through organisations like a public advisory board to have access to PPI and public and patient voices when needed. Of course, there's still challenges. There's challenges around tokenism at times. There's challenges certainly around payment and how we remunerate and how we compensate the value of lived experience. Some of that is state infrastructure and some of that is also research opinions institutions, and it's a conversation that we need to have together. How do we move away from consultation being the only source of PPI involvement? And how do we keep people engaged and supporting them long term so we don't continue again that chicken and egg situation of when to bring PPI in? And possibly the hardest one that we have to tackle, and I think we're speaking or preaching to the converted here, it's changing perceptions. There's still people who see PPI as optional. There's still people who see that as something that's nice but not necessary. And I think it's our job and the job of people in this room to keep showing that it's actually integral to everything that we want to do in research and in health and in world and in any sort of public endeavour that we are trying to take on. It helps us to lead to better research, better healthcare and better outcomes for everyone. But before I finish, and I swear I will finish up, I just want to come back to something really, really simple. And that, for me, PPI isn't about getting everything perfect. It's not about having the right thing at the right time all the time, but it is about participation. It is about being curious. It is about being open. It's about being willing to listen, even when it's uncomfortable. It's about 16-year-old me being diagnosed with a life-changing condition, but walking into a healthcare system that's actually designed for young people. It's actually designed for people like me to be there. So my journey from a patient partner to being part of advisory boards to other projects that I've taken on has taught me that the most powerful change happens when people feel heard. So let's keep learning together, let's keep questioning, reflecting, and keep building partnerships that make a real difference. Thank you.
And tell me when it's 10
Thanks very much, Cameron. And now we're happy to take some questions from the audience, and we'll come to some online as well. Cameron, I'll leave you moderate your own questions. You're more than capable.
That's good, thank you.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me, Cameron?
I can, yeah.
Will I wait for the mic or talk?
Maybe wait for the mic so the people online can hear as well.
Thank you so much for your speech today, and it really resonated with me. My name is Joan Jordan. I'm a bit older than you. I'm 53, but I got diagnosed with MS about 20 years ago, and so I have been involved with PPI in Ireland and Europe. I'm a UPATI fellow over the last 20 years. My main question is about, we've come so far, but I think now we really are at a roadblock with remuneration, and that it's particular to Ireland, that if you would like to work in research, you need to leave invalidity pension, which is what most people who have a long-term disability, I have multiple sclerosis and need my invalidity pension to live. But if I participate in a research project and are remunerated, and I do have 20 years experience, so I would like to continue with that. The situation that I find myself in is that I have to change to partial capacity benefit. So I don't know if you're familiar with the current situation. I think it's a no-win situation for people who genuinely want to engage in PPI research, and I believe very strongly there should be remuneration there. So can you give a comment on the current situation?
Yeah, absolutely, and quite aware of the current situation, and I think whilst this is not a new situation for anyone that is in receipt of any sort of benefits and wants to do this type of work, it is something that is only recently.
It is a new situation because partial capacity benefit was only introduced a few years ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just think that there's a piece missing.
For sure. And I think what we mean was is that the conversation around this and it coming to light for outside of the circles that it was already aware of, I think is only just starting now. And I think it's a joint up conversation that not just institutions like this, but I think anyone that is doing PPI across Ireland, I think it's a joint up conversation that we need to have to put pressure on those that can change that infrastructure. I think it's also about redefining what we look at in terms of right now across the board for a lot of PPI activities, within institutions, educational institutions, it's very often we use a voucher system of giving someone a one-for-all voucher for participating, which for some people they're very happy to do that, but it's
a no-go when you need bread and milk.
Exactly. And it's also about looking at how do we compensate people in a way that fairly reflects the work that they've done, in a way that they are happy to be compensated. So for some people that is a one-for-all voucher, they're very happy with that. For some people it is actual pay into their bank account in a way that isn't restricted. And for other people it's access to different trainings or different educational courses that maybe they would like to take. So it is also about moving away from looking at how do we fix this as a one-size-fits-all model of here's how we pay people, but actually looking at how do we infrastructurally change some of those structural barriers, and that's a joint-up lobbying exercise. Truly, I believe that. And then it's also about how do we have multiple means of compensation that fits into what a person who's contributing to PPI would actually like to receive for their work. And then it's also about, for the other side of the house, also being challenged on the fact that, when you go to a meeting, the vast majority of academics and researchers that are sitting there are paid for their time to be there. It's not always the same for the PPI contributors, and it's about also acknowledging that, albeit uncomfortable for some people in the room, that we have that open, honest dialogue and really kind of look at where the state of affairs are right now and how we then come together to, as I said, do that, I think, lobbying exercise to change those infrastructures, but also looking at how do we actually compensate people in ways that reflects what they would like.
Right answer, thank you.
Sorry, can I just comment on this, please? I recently wrote to a minister regarding this, as someone that has spent 13 years travelling the world talking about Alzheimer's and knowing the hardships of many of the younger people diagnosed today. I'm still waiting for a response, but as an optimist, I'm sure he will be writing back to me very soon, and I hope I will have some good feedback for you all.
Thank you. Is Martha, is there any questions online?
We have no questions online.
Perfect.
Thank you. Can I also make a comment on that current conversation? And you're absolutely right. Payments are really, really difficult, and the barriers in particular around social benefits are very real. One positive thing that has happened very recently is that the rules have been changed for people who are on disability pension, which is the highest level of disability. That was previously also ruled that you could not work either paid or unpaid.
Is that invalidity pension?
Disability pension.
I thought it was invalidity pension.
Is it invalidity? Okay. But that is the highest level then of, yeah. And that has recently been changed, only a few months ago, I think. So, that took quite a lot of conversations, that took quite a lot of getting into the Department of Social Protection, talking to people who are in a position to make these kind of decisions. It's obviously there is a much bigger issue, but it's a very first toehold, hopefully, to show that, if this works in one particular case, if there's a reasoning and a case for that to be made, then maybe that can be extended in the future.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? I think this will be the last question.
Hello, I just wanted to say my name's Autumn, and I loved your talk. It was really, really informative. I love the kind of models and the goals that you're setting, and I think this can go really well, work really well in other kind of models within other disciplines. and with other health concerns. I wondered whether you felt like there was an opportunity for an organisation, a funder, such as Research Ireland, which is now so new, really, after the merger. That's not a merger, we're not supposed to call it a merger, to put some pressure and help with the kind of policies that this wonderful woman down here is trying to push with representatives. Is there a role that you feel a funder could play right now? That does seem to be an opportune moment for change within the funding landscape for Ireland, and I wondered whether you had a vision for that. And thanks again for the talk, it was great.
No, thank you. I think absolutely. I think, we've seen over the last 10 years where applications for funding have gone from never mentioning PPI to now having it as a core part of what a funder requires. But I think, in conversations around changing and shaping what the PPI landscape looks like, the more joint up thinking that we can do and the more collaborative working that we can do, and everyone pushing towards not necessarily the exact same vision, but a vision where everyone is included, I think is absolutely integral to ensuring that we have good quality, good access to and well-planned and well-supported PPI. I think having funders backing PPI as a core element ensures that in not in every case, but in a lot of cases, that people have to think very, very long and hard about how are they going to do effective PPI. I think as well, funding up agencies and funding bodies, the HRB have been doing it and others for many, many years, have PPI contributors who review those funding applications, which is really, really key to, we're not just, it's not just about saying the right thing, but it's about demonstrating that you can do the right thing and that you can collaborate and co-create these spaces with people with PPI. So I think definitely there's room for more collaborative work there, but I think there's some really good solid foundations that funding bodies have done over the last number of years.
Super. Thanks very much, Cameron, for your contribution and for your wisdom.
Well done. Very good.